Welcome. My name's John Broome. I'm the chair of the Contracts and Procurement SIG, and I am chairing this event. Very briefly, how did this event come about? I think it was David Worley at one of our SIG meetings raised it, and we spent half an hour discussing various stuff, and based on that we said, well, actually this is worthy of a webinar to discuss. Joined today by our distinguished panel of Darren, Hugo, Minney and Tony Birch. It is a joint event between the Contracts and Procurement SIG, where we have seen the rise of outcome-based procurements, and the Benefits SIG, of which Hugo's a committee member, and it's actually a Benefits SIG webinar slot that we're using. Before we go on, a few housekeeping points. The webinar is being recorded, and after perhaps a tiny little bit of editing, will be made available on the SIG community page and on the APM YouTube page. Likewise, the presentation will be made available on the community page and the APM slideshow. You as delegates cannot ask questions directly, but you should have on the GoToWebinar panel, you should have a questions slot, if you like. If you have a question onto the panel on what we're saying, then put them up there, and David Worley, who's in the background, will be filtering them for me to pick up and select. The format of this is that there will be quick introductions by the panel and a quick overview of me of the evolution of procurement. We're then going to have our three speakers give 5 to when I say 10 minutes, I'm hoping they're not going to get anywhere near 10 minutes. Little slide set from their perspectives from procurement, from the project management, from the bidders. So that'll be Darren, then Hugo, then Tony. And then we'll have panel discussions and questions, and then a summary and a close. So, and then at the end, a survey will be sent out to those attending. It would be very much appreciated if you respond to those so that we can improve on future events. And the other thing is CPD certificates are not issued for webinars, so delegates need to record that in their own logs to record their CP. Darren, can you just say a few words about you so that people know your voice?
Yeah, good morning everybody. My name's Darren Nowd. I'm Chief Procurement Officer at Durham County Council. The council spends over about £500 million on supplies, services and works, and hope to share with you some examples of the work that we've done this morning.
Okay, Hugo.
I'm Hugo Minney. I'm a member of the Benefits SIG committee, and I've been particularly interested in social return on investment and social value, and my connections with Darren are that I've been doing my best to acquire some of that £500 million.
Okay, and Tony.
Certainly, my name's Tony Birch. I run Shipley's operation here in the UK, and we're specialists in helping people bid to win business, so helping people get part of that big budget that Darren's got. Okay,
right. Okay, so this is a slide I little bit of put together. What does creating unexpected value through outcome-based procurement actually mean? And one of the reasons why we're holding this is I suspect from our different perspectives that we actually might have you'd be using the same terminology but mean it to mean something different. So I thought first of all I'd just put up 2 box 6 definitions. I won't go through the definition of value, but in broad terms, you could say if we translate that into monetary figures, it's benefit over cost, yeah, in simple terms. And an outcome is the changed circumstances or behaviours that result from the use of outputs. Now, to add a little bit around that, if you think of a project, you have inputs, you then do activities, out of that come outputs, those deliver outcomes which have a broader impact. So to give an example just to illustrate that, say we have an idea that we want to improve public health. So the inputs we might gather are nutrition experts, scientific research, marketing people and a budget. That's the inputs. The activities are we put together some sort of advertising campaign to get the message out. The outputs are the advertising adverts, whether it's on TV, in magazines, etc. The outcome we hope is healthier eating, and then the impact is that people live longer and healthier lives. Okay, so just a bit of background around that. If we move on to the next slide, this is where I plug the new contracts and procurement guide coming out later this month or early June. So what happens with a project? Well, someone identifies a need or an opportunity. It's an idea. And as you can see that I'll give you an example. So the example we discussed earlier on was reduced pollution in Durham. Yeah. Okay. That's the idea. Well, what were the benefits? Well, it will mean that people spend less time in their car, healthier background, perhaps improve the economy, all that sort of stuff. But they're just sentences. So actually, how do we know we've actually achieved something? We need some success criteria. Success criteria can be our best, if possible, quantitative, as in you can measure them, but they can be qualitative statements. And in my background, we've done them on a sort of a ladder, a scale, so they build on each other. So in Durham, that could be, well, we will reduce pollution, however it's measured by X%, yeah, or whatever, or we will reduce journey times by this amount, and so on. What are the capabilities we need to do that? Well, it could be we need a ring road of some sort. We could actually need improved IT so that people are better informed. It could be a new busway, something like that. Those are the capabilities. So we need then to deliver them. We need actually deliverables, tangible things, which can include software to deliver them. And that's what the public will see, but then goods and services make them up. Now that's sort of working down the how and the what. How do we traditionally procure that? Well, let's take the road example. Well, traditionally, 20 years ago, we get a designer in and we define every single widget, etc., which the contractor then had to build. Design and build approaches, we say, well, this is the line and level of the road and it's going to have certain bridges and so on. How you actually build those up doesn't actually matter as long as they conform with British standards and last a certain time. What does that give us when that's completed? It gives us a capability, traffic to move around Durham or whatever it is. But does that actually result in our success criteria and that are ultimately the benefits? Where outcomes probably sit is around about the success criteria in terms of contracting for outcomes. And I was asked to come up with a definition of outcomes-based procurement by David Worley. And my outcome is, it's my definition, and it's a work in progress, is selecting a provider on their capability to deliver against defined outcomes, brackets success criteria, and rewarding them in part or whole on the delivery of those outcomes. Okay, so that encompasses how we select them, how we contract and reward them. What does that mean? It typically means we have to select earlier so that they can add value. That means we have to select on expertise and ability to collaborate with others. That means there's nothing tangible to price. So how do we select them? Because the solution hasn't been developed then. And the contractor rewards are partially or wholly dependent on others' performance, which means that there's interdependency, and that introduces more risk and uncertainty and so on to a provider. So that's my overview. With that, I'm going to pass over to Darren. Darren, can you, and I know you can you give some examples of some outcome-based procurements which you've been involved in?
Yep, certainly. Well, if you have a look on the slide, there's 7 different approaches that we've taken, and to try and give you some examples of real projects at the County Council. In light of the time restrictions, I'm not going to go through all 7 of them, you'll be glad to know. Probably the simplest example is where we procured specialist professional services, which is probably commonly referred to as consultancy to most. And that was to develop the outcome really was outline business cases and cost saving opportunities of X pounds by date Y. So we gave a clear expectation to the consultants to deliver a certain amount of money with business case backed ideas by a given date. We also made it clear that the council would manage the subsequent implementation of those ideas ourselves. So there was no ambiguity or expectancy or possibility of any cost or scope creep that can often occur in this category of spend. So that meant essentially the resource allocation was totally the responsibility of the supplier. We never got into any debate about rates or hours or days. We just committed to pay 100% of the fee on a satisfactory outcome of the value being delivered in the right time scale. We had an engagement with 4 top UK consultancy companies, all of whom submitted bids. We selected the provider, we undertook the activity with them, paid the bill within 7 days. based on a satisfactory outcome. So very much the risk was their side. The time, the resources for the project was allocated by them, and we got a very good outcome from that project. Another example is a little bit different, where we bought banking services. So the council procured a collaborative contract on behalf of the council, police, fire and rescue, and several hundred schools in County Durham. Obviously, as you will know, with government cuts to public sector expenditure, it's essential that we get the best possible value and social value outcomes out of every pound that we spend. So we did extensive pre-procurement market testing. We did identify through that the banks genuinely were really interested in improving their own reputation, which probably doesn't come as a surprise to many, but they were all committing to deliver social value outcomes. So in addition to the banking service, we set certain outcome expectations in terms of social value commitment, and out of that we got the banks to commit to teach children about money matters in schools. They also committed to deliver and have delivered support to local credit unions. So that was improving the commercial acumen of credit unions. So if people went to banks and perhaps they weren't able to get a loan, the banks could then signpost them to credit unions who had suitable education and training to manage people. Being candid, all of that work would probably have been carried out by the supplier somewhere, but as a result of our outcome-based approach, we managed to make sure that it happened in Durham. Third one, and this is work in progress, but it's a truly innovative scheme where we were seeking to solve social isolation, and we've committed to spend £100,000 via our economic development company, Business Durham. The outcomes are quite clear, but what the solution will be, we're not quite sure. It may not even exist. So in terms of that contract, we may award one contract for 100,000, 10 contracts at 10,000, and it's early days. But the solution, it could be a report, it could be a new company, it could be a new service, it could be a new product, it could be several of those things. So it's watch this space with that one, because we will be publicising the outcome of that work. Just in terms of the approach, this next picture just shows you the strategic procurement resource allocation in 3 phases of any project. The dotted line highlights, the way maybe traditionally resource allocation have been focused very much on the doing of the procurement phase, but the outcome-based approach needs extensive pre-procurement work in terms of needs analysis, commissioning, as is called in local government, or service design, perhaps, as people might more readily understand, and solution development. That then is followed by innovative procurement processes. But the third phase you can see on the right is it's really important that you have robust contract management and relationship management to make sure that all of the planned project benefits are chased down and actually realised for the customer. And the final point I wanted to raise, I'm not going to go through all of these, this is my view of the world in terms of really the key success factors or the enablers that you need to ensure that you get the right outcomes. Obviously a top level commitment to strategic procurement resources, outcome-based service design and commissioning, and really to try and maximise social value. Really robust KPIs need to be put in place so you've got something to measure. And I think, as John touched on before, there's a lot of dependency. So quite often, joint accountability plays a key role in any of the work. That's me.
Okay, right. I should say before we move on to Hugo, is that if there's anything which people want more detail on, please raise that as a question, and that'll be part of the Q&As, etc. later on, or anything you just want amplified or clarified or whatever. Because as I said, one of the things we know is that people talk different languages, and so you might not what someone says might mean something different to you, and you might want that clarified. Okay, moving on to Hugo. Hugo.
I'll give a little bit of background to what is Tyne Health and what we do, because that's what I currently spend most of my time on, although I also run a medical charity and social return community interest company. The Federation of GP Practices is a professional association where a group of GP practices work together to deliver primary care at scale. But we're also relevant because we host the Congress of Northeast Federations, which covers around 2 million patients. So there's a whole lot that can be done that you kind of wander along thinking what's being done, and it takes a little bit to realise it is going on. I think we're all used to the old way of looking at projects as quality, cost, time. Does that look familiar to people? I know I can't see your responses, but I hope it does. And that's really what we need to move beyond. We need to begin, as I've put it, begin with the end in mind. So quality, cost, time hasn't gone away. It's still in there. It's still in that triangle. The new phase is to understand a whole lot more about what the business need is in the first place and what additional value could be created on top. The business need has to be met, and the additional value is beyond that. For a lot of project managers, this can be really quite scary. A lot of project managers are very much into control. Project management is to some extent about control. And of course, once you're looking at the business need, it's things outside your control. And once you're looking at additional value, very often that's delivered beyond the time period that you have control. But what we're talking about with outcome-based procurement, what we're talking about with benefits management within project management is where you make decisions and what decisions you make. So the traditional approach for project management has been to make decisions that get you to the next milestone. And what we need to change is to make decisions that get the best result given the current circumstances. We know that circumstances are constantly moving, and it's important to recognise that circumstances are constantly moving, and that may affect your decisions within the tolerance for error. I think anybody looking at this will recognise it's very much the traditional programme and portfolio management approach. But that's because projects by themselves don't deliver benefits. It usually takes a programme to deliver benefits, a combination of projects. Projects deliver capability. Projects combined deliver a whole solution, and the whole solution is what delivers the intended outcome. And this is where we're saying you need to know what else is going on. As a project manager in a single project, you need to know how important your activities, your functions, the capability you deliver is to the other projects going on at the same time, so that they can be integrated and so that they add to each other. For those familiar with change management, you'll be familiar with this method, this approach. The difference here is the importance of measurement. You need the lead indicators, the measurements that show you what you can measure now that we predict will lead to good results in the future. We may not be able to guarantee they'll lead to good results in the future, but they're things we can measure now. And they're very valuable to motivate people to get that desire and to make sure those actions happen and to make sure those actions are happening in the right direction. Some of the lag indicators, the indicators of what actual impact you're having, may take years to come through, and obviously decisions have to be made now. So it's really important to decide what are the lead indicators that you're going to use, because there's the saying, what gets measured gets done. And if you're measuring the wrong things will get done. The example I'd like to bring in here is HS2, the high-speed rail link, where they had a series of indicators on the early contractors, they still have them, for noise levels during the early stages. And that's because if the noise levels are too high, they won't get planning permission for later stages. So there are obstacles, and the obstacles are fairly straightforward. There will always be arguments over attribution, and there are also the assumption that if you've been told you've got savings, then you're going to see your budget cut. There are very real professional reasons why people say we don't want to change because we know the current system works. I've mentioned before every project manager's nightmare, which is things that are outside of their control. And there's that fundamental problem that it's neither sexy nor fun. It has to be done though, and it's a key part of outcomes procurement.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Hugo. We're now going to move on to our last speaker, Tony, who is remote from us. So, Tony, away you go.
Thank you very much, John. Well, in my 5 minutes, I've been asked to talk to you about offering value from a bidder's perspective. And after this short element that I'm going to cover, you will have an insight into how to put together value propositions for your prospective customers to help them deliver their outcomes. The first part I want to talk about is the misconception that value is just about price. A low price for a service isn't the only way that someone can appreciate value. Although the customer must be able to attribute a cost to what they're achieving, because if they don't do that, they can't justify the procurement. The value proposition from you is the business case for the customer. So you need to be offering value, and you need to understand what value you're offering. I'd also like you to remember that good value propositions are always quantified. It is fairly pointless saying to someone, we're going to help you reduce your costs, unless you tell them to say by how much. So strong value propositions, as it says at the top of the slide, deliver tangible results. So let's talk about some of these propositions. The outcome that the customer might want. So first one, reducing costs. The customer may say the outcome that they're looking for is a reduction in their CapEx or a reduction in their OpEx. Simple cost reduction. And whatever service or product they want to buy from you should help them to do that. They may want to improve their customer retention by making their customer experience better. So they may be asking you for a service or a product that allows them to improve their own customer's experience. That's something that's very valuable. Retaining their customers saves them costs in sales. They may want to simply increase their revenue by improving their product or service. They may be looking for something from you that helps them to do that. Going further, they might want to improve their operational efficiency by doing things more efficiently, by improving their processes, their response times, whatever it is that they're looking to do. Increasing their market share by improving their product or service performance relative to competitors. So they're looking to gain some advantage in their marketplace from something that they gain from you. Reducing time to market by reducing development time or testing time or just simply doing things more efficiently. And last but not least, on the bottom right there, by improving the working environment, they may want to decrease their employee turnover. We all know that employee turnover is expensive. These are all things which a customer could potentially value, and in the earlier presentation we talked about value beyond the capability that you deliver. This is the basis on which decision makers choose who they want to work with, who offers them the most value, and you need to find out what they value. If we could move on a slide, please. So there are 5 elements to a value proposition. Firstly, what is the customer trying to improve? What are they trying to do differently? As mentioned earlier on about we want to reduce the pollution levels in the centre of the city of Durham. That's what they're trying to improve. And by how much? As was also said earlier, if it's not measured, how do you know it's been achieved? So you need to understand from the customer how much they can expect to improve whatever it is they want to improve. And then a very important thing, the target situation. We're talking about projects providing capability early on. As a result of what they are able to do differently using the new capability that you provide. So they're buying a capability, but it's them that deliver the value. You're providing the product or service that allows them to deliver the value. Very important in terms of business case terms and justification. Over what timeline? And last but not least, they still need to know how much they're going to have to invest. What's their investment? How much is it going to cost them? Those 5 elements should be critical to any offer you make to any existing or new customer. And you can put them together in any order. The customer will have the ability to improve what, by how much, through the ability to do what differently as a result of what it is that you give them, all for an investment of how much is it going to cost. So the last point I want to make, just while that slide's there, why would they believe you? If I put a value proposition forward that said, I'm going to reduce your costs by 20% per annum, why would I believe you? So one of the important elements of value propositions is the supporting information. I would recommend that you support any value proposition that you put forward to a client, whether it's in a proposal, whether it's in a presentation, whether it's just in a meeting. Give them an example of where you've delivered similar value to a similar client, hopefully. The more the clients like them, the more they will understand its relevance. And you give it in the form of a short case study. So describe the customer situation, the previous customer, what they wanted to achieve, what action you as an organisation took, and the outcome that that customer achieved. Finally, I hope this brief element has helped you to understand how to develop value propositions for both existing and future clients. With that, I'm happy to hand back to John.
Okay, leading on from that, so into panel discussion, do feel free to put up some questions. We've got a few coming through. Tony, how do you, when you're approaching a new client, how do you determine what is of value to them? So you might have your formal brief, but I know that that might not encapsulate, as someone who has helped bidders, that might not encapsulate everything. And the title is We're Creating Unexpected Value. So how do you find out what those unsaid things or those inferred things about what is value to a client?
Very good question. The simple answer is you have to ask them. And that implies, particularly in public sector procurement situations, that you're talking with those decision makers, hopefully, before the invitation to tender, request for a proposal, whatever the document is, actually goes live, because oftentimes it's difficult to pose those sorts of questions. Some of the things you can do by third-party research, you can look at public sources of information. If you're bidding to a government department, there may be a policy document that already states what their goals and names and the things that they value are. Or in a company, it might be in the chairman's report or press releases. That may give you an indicator, but really, honestly, there's no substitute for talking to the customer and asking them, what do they value? What does success look like for them?
Mm-hmm. And moving on to you, Darren, you spent a lot of your career in the private sector and then now in the public sector. And the public sector, how can I put it, has lots of constraints on how it procures, just a few. If you can set out your success criteria, your outcomes, how you measure them, etc., and a supplier comes back and says, oh, I can offer something off the scale on that. But how do you take account if they come back and say, well, actually, you haven't asked for this, but we can see a linkage between another project, a program over there, and create unexpected value? And you go, well, actually, that's not part of my evaluation criteria. So we love what you say. How do you take account of that when setting up a procurement?
It's a really good point. I think, as Tony's highlighted, the real opportunity is by talking an early dialogue, because one of the big issues or the big contrasts between public sector and private sector is the public sector has to be very transparent, and it has to say upfront in advance how it's going to make decisions, and then prove to people that they followed their own rules after the procurement is finished. So if you go back to, if you think about the slide that I put up about the 3 phases of engagement, the pre-procurement phase is critical. So, the banking services one is a really good example, that reinforces Tony's points, where we wanted to buy transactional banking services for ourselves and several other collaborative partners. We also wanted to maximize the social value outcomes, so social, economic, environmental outcomes, for County Durham. You would think it would be quite tricky in a banking services contract to do that. Through the early dialogue that we had with all of the banks, it was quite clear, because of the general reputation of banks across the country, from misdemeanors of the past, they were very, very keen to try and improve their stock and reputation with people. So they actually had plans to do a lot of, they didn't call it social value, that social value they wanted was our language, but they wanted to do a lot of good things for communities to improve their reputation. And it became quite clear that some of the stuff that they were planning to do would be of great value to us. It might not have happened in Durham, but it would have happened somewhere. So, the support for teaching kids money matters in schools, obviously we manage an education service in the council as well, that offered real value to people, and obviously also supporting local credit unions to help people get financial support in certain circumstances. That added a lot of value. So when we'd done the extensive dialogue, we included certain things in the procurement. So for example, the requirements to teach kids money matters in schools, we actually included that in the specification. So that wasn't part of the evaluation criteria. We specified it as a requirement. It was directly related to the procurement and it was proportionate. So, legally we were allowed to do that. There were certain other aspects that we included in the evaluation criteria. But the key point is, if we hadn't undertaken that pre-procurement work, we could have been in a situation in the evaluation phase where the banks were coming to offer added value and services that we hadn't taken into account, and we wouldn't have been able to use it in the award criteria to award the contract.
Okay, thank you. One for Hugo, although it seems to be addressed to Darren, but it seems to be more relevant to Hugo. And that one is and there's several questions of this theme as well. It says often benefits not realised until some way downstream, so lead indicators are going to be very important. How do you ensure that these are the right ones? i.e. we'll realise actual benefits long after the contract has expired or the delivery phase of the contract has expired. So any tips on that?
Well, the simple answer is there's nothing new under the sun. There are ways there are things that have been done all over the world. There's an organisation called Social Value UK, which is the governing body for social return on investment, which maintains the database of things that have been done and the lead indicators and lag indicators that were used to justify how they were done. So you can learn from other people's mistakes, but a lot of it is making a judgment and as Tony says, getting into dialogue, and as Darren says, making sure that dialogue happens early, to come up between you with, we know we want to achieve this, how could we see it was going in the right direction, and through dialogue, how can we find out whether that's actually, that lead indicator is actually wrong, that lead indicator is indicating something totally different, or whether there is a direct connection. I mean, the benefits management tool is benefits mapping, which is a very good way to illustrate this. But the danger with benefits mapping is it's often done in a darkened room by someone on their own, and it needs to be done as a discussion between a number of people who can find fault with it if there's fault to be found.
Okay, yeah, and I would mention that I've used value management techniques to define what success looks like, weight, if you like, the success criteria, and then the amount that it's worth to the clients as part of that reward mechanism. And from a procurement point of view, what you have to do is you have to make sure that what you're willing to pay for it is less. Is obviously less than the benefit you receive, but is actually more than it will cost the supplier to provide it, because if those things don't match up, they're not going to pursue that particular success criteria. Point from you, Darren.
Yeah, I think another issue here is quite often with outcome-based procurement, people think it is all about payment by results, which it can be, and that's can be helpful in some cases. But I think going back to, is it the right indicator and how do you ensure that it happens? Again, if you're having that early dialogue pre-procurement and you're making it clear to prospective bidders that, for example, I think in one of the, in one of the slide about learning disabilities, for example, and domestic abuse support, we made it quite clear what the KPIs were upfront in advance of the procurement, having had extensive market share. We also made it clear pre-procurement that we were intending to claw back funding and take payment deductions if KPIs were not achieved. If you do that upfront in advance and in collaboration with the prospective marketplace before you formally go to procurement, the marketplace itself will make sure that the KPI is right, that the KPI is measurable, that the KPI is relevant, because if that is ultimately going to have an impact on their financial reward for the contract, they will speak up early in advance of you formally going to the marketplace. So for me, a lot of this stuff is about really having earliest possible dialogue before you go to market. It's different in the private sector, you know, because you can change your mind later on. You don't have to be as transparent with regard to your decision or your award criteria that you're going to award the contract to. But in the public sector, you have to be very transparent and you have to be very clear, hence the need for the pre-procurement work.
Okay. Got one question which actually seems to disappear as a question, but I thought it was quite an interesting one. It's about the level of resource. Does it require more resource? And Darren's slide showed an up and a down. My question is also related to it. Does it require different resource? And actually approaching it from a provider's point of view, which is, so the question is going to you, Tony. Do you look at clients who are doing this and go, well, culturally, they're just not there? How do you assess that? Yeah, and then I'll probably come to Darren and say, how have you tweaked your culture, skills, capabilities, etc.? So, Tony, do you look at with your providers, your clients? Do you assess the client's readiness? Do you have to put in more resource for this?
The answer is it depends, as you'd expect. There's, again, a big difference between the public sector and private sector. Go public sector first. As Darren's mentioned already, the transparency of process requires all this stuff to be clear up front. There's a lot more work for the procurement people to think about what outcomes they want rather than just buying something that they're specifying. And it's a very hard thing to do because you have in your mind a picture of a solution when you're buying something, and if the offer is something all you're asking for is the outcome and someone offers to do it a different way than you would have thought, the temptation is as a buyer to sort of intervene and say, no, actually I thought this would be made out of glass, not plastic, you know, whatever it is, and then it stopped being an outcome-based procurement. You're actually then starting to specify. I think in general public sector there's more data about public sector procurement, and by following processes and proper procedures, they probably get better outcomes, I think, than private sector does. And in terms of the resources, there was a question that's disappeared, but from Tony Callahan, was it? About a report a few years ago into competitive dialogue, which is the public sector procurement process for outcome-based procurements. And after analysing it for essentially 5 years over government practices, the National Audit Office found that it was costing the customer about 1.5 times as much to procure. So in terms of resources, costing the time of the individuals involved in discussing the procurement process. And it was costing the seller typically 1 3/4 times of what they would normally spend on a traditional procurement, because of that interaction, that time taken to understand what is that their customer values, what's important. So I don't know if that quite answered the question, but
yeah, it was also the nature of it's one thing to say time of the resource. Is it the nature of the resource?
The sort of people involved are different, yes.
Right, in what way?
Well, if you're looking to buy an outcome and you're a buyer, you're looking to interact, discuss with people who know what they're talking about, not just salespeople, not meaning disrespectful to salespeople, but you need someone to understand your vision and interpret that back into capabilities that will allow you to achieve that vision. So it's a different type of sale, it's a different type of process. The delivery people should be involved much earlier because they need to gain a full understanding of the outcome and then effectively design the solution on the fly so that they can come back and specify what it is they're going to offer in terms of services or products to allow the customer to achieve their outcome. So it's a different type of resource on the seller side, certainly, and probably on the buyer side, because it's you're not at the level of specifying how thick the tarmac needs to be. You're at the level of setting policy rather than specification.
Okay, and Darren's been scribbling some sort of response furiously down while you've been speaking. So over to Darren.
I think I've got
Darren, in terms of quantity, but also have you the type of people you get involved, more generically the systems, any organisational changes you've made within Durham County Council?
Yeah, I'll touch on the resource implications, and then I'll try and come back to Tony's point about competitive dialogue separately, if you remind me at the end. In terms of the resource implications, I think the slide that I showed shows the increased resource earlier, and in terms of the pre-procurement phase, and also in the contract management phase. The middle bit, the middle section in terms of the procurement process, the more work that you do up front to get things right and ensure that you're specifying the right outcomes and you're following the right procedures and processes, in theory should mean that your procurement procedure, your procurement phase can be quicker than it might be. But I think the biggest impact that we've seen is not so much in terms of the resource benefits in the middle section, it's the better outcomes. So in terms of different types of people involved, you know, historically I'm told in the public sector, you know, you would have somebody in a dark room somewhere that would go away and design something, and then he would come into the procurement function and then give him the design to say, go and buy me one of those, or buy that service for me. Very much now for us, we work very, very closely with, in social care cases, we call it the commissioners, in non-social care stuff that we buy, I would call them like service managers or service designers. So there's very much a collaborative approach to the outcome development, to the early market engagement, the early market development. So that does take up a lot of time, but being candid, for me, that is what strategic procurement is all about. You know, it might be an oversimplification, but the middle section, the procurement process itself and the procedures that you follow are actually very clearly set out, including the timescales. And even though there, you know, there's legal implications, the processes are not too difficult to understand or to implement. The value really is the knowledge and the collaborative working that takes place pre-procurement to ensure that you're actually procuring the right service, solution, or goods, work, supplies to, you know, to deliver the outcome. Probably the biggest resource implication that has been a challenge for the council, I think, and others, is in the contract management phase. You know, I've read many reports in the past that you know, language such as let and forget. So you put a lot of good work in the planning phase, you then deliver a great procurement, you contract for something with specified outcomes, then nobody chases it down to make sure that those benefits are realised. So the benefits realisation in project management language is really important, and that needs specific skills in terms of contract management. So, you know, we've had to train people in contract management, and that's something that we need to do. And you know, I have a personal view that is probably the weakest area of public sector procurement capability. I think pre-procurement and procurement phase, the capability in the public sector, being candid, far outweighs the capability in the private sector from my own experience. But the private sector do have resources and very skilled people in the contract management and benefits realisation phase. So, you know, I think everybody could learn from this, but I think public sector specifically.
Very quickly, your second point.
Yeah, the competitive dialogue question, and it's a very good point. I think it's fair to say when that procedure was, or that process that's set out in the public contract regulations was launched, it was quite clear what you could do and how you would go about things, but it was just badly applied. I think it was a new procedure. I think a lot of people's experiences were, for example, in the Building Schools for the Future programme, which again was very robustly managed, and I think it was just down to poor application. And I think now, you know, currently the process is much better managed, but we've also got additional procedures that we can use. So there's a procedure now called competitive procedure with negotiation, which we could talk about at length on another day, but that does give you the opportunity to do different things in different ways. So, you know, and as well as the application of competitive dialogue, some people may have chosen that procedure to deliver their procurement when it just wasn't the right procedure to use. So at the end of the day, for me, it's about experience and lessons learned from, you know, projects. We tend not to use the competitive dialogue process that much because it is resource hungry, but we are more and more starting to use competitive procedure with negotiation.
Okay. Hugo, I think earlier on you and you called project managers, and I think you didn't quite go this far, but control freaks, something like that. Yeah. Do the nature of work with outcomes is that what's defined at the start isn't, perhaps the solution certainly isn't clear cut, you're collaborating and so on. Does a traditional control freak project manager with their this is a defined activity, it finishes here, you know, and it's clearly finishable, and now we move on to this, does that need to change for outcome based?
I think we're already seeing it with project management, program management offices, that we are seeing a breed. I can't say new because they've been around for long enough for some of them to be our grandfathers. There are a breed of people who manage programs and recognize the interaction of different projects, and there are a breed of people who manage portfolios who are very much aware of the business needs. So I think there's a place for what one might term the traditional, and there's a place for a whole lot of people who might have found the old-fashioned project management a little constraining and are quite enjoying having a bit more flexibility and a bit more excitement.
Okay, right, okay. Thanks. Another question, if I can find it on this, and it was based on something along the lines of how do you determine the amount of remuneration you're going to give to the contractor for achieving a success criteria, an outcome, and what happens if they don't meet it? Yeah, in terms of, do you penalise them? You can't penalise them under UK law, but you can deduct points or whatever. Do you incentivise them positively, etc.? But first of all, how do you determine as a client value? And I know in terms of benefits management, you have a methodology. Can you just briefly outline that, Hugo?
So one of the most robust methodologies is the one that the Social Return on Investment uses, and you can pick up I'm going to plug this, you can pick up my booklet from the APM website by typing SRI into the search box. It's a very robust methodology, so it's quite useful from that point of view. But a lot of it's going to come back to dialogue, because a lot of the extra value that's being added has a cost to the provider and a value to the commissioner, to the buyer, which hopefully are many orders of magnitude apart. So what you're looking for is a point between the two. So if you like, you're saying, we know how much it's worth to us, but how little can we pay for it? And the providers, the bidder is saying, what value do we put on this that will be deducted, could potentially be deducted from the project value if we don't deliver? So it's that brinkmanship of trying to put enough value that your bid wins, at the same time trying not to put so much value that you stand to lose a whole lot of their bid value if you fail to deliver that portion. And similarly, by the commissioner, by the contractor, by the buyer, how much value do we put on this in balance with everything else that we're also having bid by other people? Okay,
Tony, what's your perspective on that? How do you look at what they're proposing to pay for an outcome? How do you do that, approach that from a contractor's, provider's point of view?
As I tried to say in my brief element of the webinar, it's about understanding what value you actually offer. What is the impact of what you're offering? Too many times, the price that someone offers for a service is based on what it costs them to deliver, when it should be based on what the value is to the client. that value could be considerably more than it costs. It's something of very high value to them. Or it could be something that's actually of relatively low value but costs you a lot to implement. And what you're ideally looking to do is find things which the customer values highly, and I'm afraid it's about interacting again, as was mentioned earlier by Darren and others. Interact with the client and ask them how much they value. What would be the impact if we were able to, I don't know, reduce your, improve your staff efficiency such that they were 20% more productive than they are today as a result of deploying this tool? What would be the impact on your organization? And that's how you put a value on it. The only people that can put the value on really are people from the procurement side, from the customer side. They know what it costs, and particularly with the softer things like decreasing employee turnover and or improving operational efficiency. You may have some insight from what you did from another client, but essentially, that's what I mentioned about the case studies. You need to be measuring the value that you've delivered with existing clients, and that will give you some indication of what you can offer to another client. So if you worked with one bank and you helped them reduce their operational costs by 20%, I don't know why it's always 20%. If you did that, then you could probably do the same for another bank if you understand how.
Okay, thank you. There's suddenly a rash of really interesting extra questions have come in, or at least that I've noticed have come in, and I would dearly love us to answer them, but unfortunately we're running out of time. What we will attempt to do is to put answers together for those questions and distribute them, and put them up on boards, etc., and so on, so that you get answers to those. So in terms of summaries, what I'd like each of you to do, each of the panelists, to think of the most useful insight from the discussions from the others that have actually said something. So not your most useful insight. Tony, you went last of the panelists. What would yours be?
I think the most useful thing, and actually the most difficult concept to understand, we're picking up from two of the other presentations really, John, was there's the immediate value and there's the future value, and there's a few questions about future value or unasked for value. And I think understanding the timelines of the value propositions and being clear with the client and yourself that the value may not be immediate. If you install a system for someone and they have to use it for a year to get their money back, then you're not offering immediate value with your original install. So it's that concept of being quite clear in what's the present value and what's the future value, and making sure that you understand what your offering is offering so that you can have that discussion with the prospective customer or client.
Okay, Hugo?
I think we're on a journey here. So some organisations are still very much at the specification and buy to a price, and some organisations are well into outcomes-based specifications. And I think the project manager needs to understand what is the culture where they're delivering their project, and therefore how much flexibility to exercise, and how much to base decisions on the next milestone or base them on delivering the maximum value. Because if you start trying to deliver the maximum value in a traditional environment, then you can cause confusion and upset. I know I've done it myself.
A lesson hard learned. Darren?
Yeah, I think for me, just reinforcing, you can never start early enough in terms of planning your procurement and working with colleagues and having early dialogue with the market to get things right. But maybe one of the things that we haven't touched upon, and maybe it's for another day, is I think if you're going to do outcome-based procurement, it's really important that the market has a credible opinion and view of you and your procurement or your commissioning function. So I think you need to walk before you run, and try and get some successes so the market gets confident that you're a capable procurement function. and obviously relationships take time to develop. So, you know, I would never advocate going to a payment by results contract right at the outset. You know, maybe that's something that you would do further down the line, after you've had some experiences of outcome-based procurement and both yourself and the marketplace have confidence that the methodologies work.
Okay. For me, it's a very simple but obvious, absolutely obvious one, but it was, oh yeah, of course. And that was defining those success criteria, outcomes, and that timeline of those early indicators, and that they have to, if you like, there's going to be a line of sight through to the later ongoing value in them. With that, we're almost done. I would just, before you go, thank you for attending, obviously. There's some upcoming conferences. The APM Benefit Summit 2017. Hugo, what's the benefit of that?
Because benefits management is a mindset, it makes a lot of sense to understand the mindset that's going on. As we talked about, it's a different kind of person, one who's focused on control and one who's focused on trying to broaden the conversation. And it's very valuable to be there and to understand what people are doing, what's currently going on in the world, and obviously to look for your next employer.
Okay. And then I'll give a quick plug for our launch conference of our contracts and procurement guide. Our experience, as the world gets ever more complex, you need to bring in more and more people earlier and earlier to deliver successful outcomes. Yeah, they have to be selected. They're on capability, technical capability, collaboration. If you're the project LN Charlie who just picks up the contract and you're dealt a poor hand, then you're on a loser from the start. Equally, if you don't know your contract and the other party does, then you can be in serious breaches, etc., and that will cost your client a lot of money and undermine your the success of you as a project manager, basically. Our view is contracts are going to get ever more. You're going to have to deliver projects under contract more and more, so you need to know about them. You need to know the basics, and that's what the interactive program we're putting together will be about. With that, thank you very much for attending. We will answer the questions. Goodbye. Thank you.